You know, it's kind of crazy to think that out of all the Windows-related stuff that we've covered on this channel, I have yet to talk about the Microsoft Zune. So I'm finally going to do that today because this is a really fascinating piece of the company's history. Now, if you've heard of the Zune before, you probably know that this was supposed to be Microsoft's answer to the iPod. That device that was going to finally dethrone Apple's top spot in market share, or at the very least, put a very significant dent in it. But it ultimately wasn't able to do either of those things, so it's remembered today as a failure of a product that shows up on listicles alongside Microsoft Bob and Windows Vista as one of the worst Microsoft products ever released. And that's usually where the conversation ends. But today I want to examine the Zune from a different angle, through the lens of somebody who never used one of these things before, and see how it actually stacks up. Was this really a terrible product, or did the iPod's 5-year head start just make it too big to fail? Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. So I gotta give a huge thank you to Rose for sending me this first generation Zune complete in box that has been sitting on my ever-growing project shelf for like many months now, just begging to be talked about already. But the tech world started talking about this thing back in November of 2006 when Microsoft welcomed everybody to the social. Because this was more than just a music player, people. It was your connection to a world of media and to entertainment-loving people like yourself. And corporate speak aside, they weren't wrong, because the Zune had some forward-thinking features that really made it stand out from the iPod. For one, you had the Zune social platform, where users could make a profile to list their favorite songs and see what music their friends were listening to, which is really reminiscent of the way Spotify is today. And speaking of music streaming services, Microsoft launched one of their own with the Zune Pass subscription, which was one of the 2 ways to acquire songs for your Zune player. The other being just buying songs outright from the Zune marketplace for $1 each, much like you could do on iTunes. But I think that the Zune Pass, even to this day, was the best deal for a music streaming service, and we will probably never see anything like it again. For $15 a month, you got access to millions of songs in the Zune marketplace that you could download and sync to your Zune player, or just play from your computer. Of course, each of these songs contained a DRM, so you couldn't burn them to a CD or anything like that. And you couldn't listen to them after your subscription expired unless you chose to renew it. And I know what you're thinking, $15 a month in today's standards is pretty high for one of these services, though I imagine it won't be too long till we all get used to paying that much anyways. But Zune Pass got substantially better in 2008 when Microsoft started allowing you to keep 10 songs that you downloaded through it at the end of every single month that you were a subscriber, regardless of if you chose to renew the subscription or not. And each song you picked would become DRM free, so you could do whatever you wanted with it. So essentially, you were only paying $5 a month to get access to Zune Pass and then buying 10 songs every month that you would actually own. And I just got to give props to Microsoft here. That is a really cool model for a streaming service that I really wish had caught on more. I mean, imagine if like you could download a couple episodes from your favorite show on Netflix every month to be able to watch offline and have actual video files that you could copy over to your other devices and, you know, do whatever you want with them. You would own them. I mean, that would be pretty cool. Of course, you can forget any chance of that ever happening, but it's a nice thought. Now, there was a feature the Zune had that got even more coverage than this, and that, of course, was the ability to wirelessly share songs with other Zune users. Or, as Microsoft called it, squirting. Yeah, so this is the thing that the Zune is remembered for the most these days, which I think is hilarious because they never called it that. Despite what the gazillion Today I Learned Reddit posts will have you believe, the feature was never officially called squirting. Yeah, I hate to be the well actually guy here, and thankfully I'm not. Ken from the Computer Clan is, because he pointed this out back in his Zune video a couple years ago, and that's where I first learned about it. But he went through the official documentation for the Zune, and sure enough, the word squirting doesn't show up in it. However, Steve Ballmer did use the term on stage once in this masterful quote that I think only he could have said with a straight face, and I think that's why so many people have been Mandela affected into believing that Microsoft officially called it this. But even if they did, they wouldn't actually be wrong to call it that, though it would certainly be ill-advised. But as Ken also pointed out, the term squirting is actually just a generic term for sending a file wirelessly that existed long before the Zune did, so this was not a Microsoft thing at all. Why exactly it was called squirting, I have no idea. I guess everybody in this industry is just a major pervert. But hey, at least now your search history has some plausible deniability to it. Anyways, so if you had a Zune and you knew someone else who had a Zune, you could share a song with them that they could play 3 times within a 3-day period, though this was later updated to remove that time limit, which is pretty cool, and that was a nice way to share songs that you owned with somebody else pretty easily. As for the hardware itself, well, this, if I can get the box open, this is what it looked like. The Zune came in 3 colors originally. This is the black variant, but there was also a white and brown one. And later on, there were 2 special edition colors. You had pink and red. And also inside the box, we've got kind of your typical stuff you would have with an MP3 player. So we've got your charging cable, which looks kind of suspiciously like a 30-pin connector here, but it's not. And then we have a pair of headphones right here, standard 3.5mm jack, which is nice. And then on the back, we've got your documentation and the software CD and a couple other things. We've got this nice little carrying pouch. It's a really firm, snug fit. It's also kind of difficult to get in. You got to really stretch this thing around it, and then you slide it in like that, and there you go. You got a little pouch for your Zune. You also have in here. Oh, that's it. There was nothing else in here. Okay, well, you've got a 14-day free trial to a Zune Pass subscription, which means that this was one of the first million Zunes sold because they stopped including this afterwards. And then also you've got your software CD, which we will certainly make use of later. And then this right here is the product guide. And then right here is the start guide, which tells you how to hook this thing up to your computer and what all the buttons do. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to be comparing the Zune to the flagship iPod model that was available at the time of its launch, because there's a lot of things that the Zune did well, and there's other areas that it fell behind in. And like I said, I have not owned one of these until now, so I'd like to go into it from that perspective and explore the user interface and how this hardware interacts with the desktop software to see what the Zune experience was really like. And we're going to start with the hardware. But first, I need to add this thing to my list of every computer and device that I have, which is something I've been working on for a while now, and it turns out it makes a great segue into talking about today's video sponsor, Notion. Because I've been using their platform to create this database, and it has turned out exactly as I wanted it. Having all of this information in one place makes keeping track of what I have much easier when I'm planning videos. And it honestly didn't take that long to set up. Now, you might already be familiar with Notion's note-taking features, but they've got a whole lot more built into the platform, including, you guessed it, an AI chatbot. Now look, I think there are a lot of ridiculous AI gimmicks out there, but I found Notion AI to be actually useful because it made creating this database so much easier. All I had to do was tell it what I was going to use the database for, and it threw the whole thing together, even adding some example entries so I could see how everything would be laid out. And since Notion AI learns from what's in my workspace, I can quickly ask it for a model number or how much RAM one of my computers has, instead of having to scroll through the database myself. Plus, I can use research mode to have it, for example, search online for the release year and original sale price of everything in my collection and combine it all into a nice report for me, which is all done without training their AI on my data. You can get started with Notion today by clicking the link below and get a free trial of their AI features. So be sure to check them out, and huge thanks again to Notion for making today's video possible. So the first gen Zune also came to be known as the Zune 30 to differentiate it from the future models, because this thing has a 30 gig hard drive inside, allowing you to store approximately 7,500 songs, just like the baseline flagship iPod that came out a couple months before the Zune, which a lot of people refer to as the 5.5 gen. Both of these things sold for $249, which I think right off the bat set the Zune up for failure. You had to pay the same amount of money for a device that was first-gen hardware in a not as established ecosystem. But there were a few things that the Zune had over the iPod. You can see it has a slightly larger display. This thing is 3 inches as opposed to 2.5 inches on the iPod. It also has a slightly larger battery, but you actually don't get as much battery life out of this thing as you do with the iPod, probably because of the slightly larger screen and some of the other hardware this thing has to power, like its wireless adapter and its built-in FM radio tuner, which this is definitely a nice accessory. You can go and listen to the radio on this thing right out of the box. I imagine it's not a main reason why you would be buying one of these things, but you can't do that with the iPod unless you bought a $50 stupid accessory from Apple. The Zune is also a bit thicker than the iPod, not that that's really something that I personally care too much about, because in my opinion, the worst thing about the Zune, hands down, are its navigation controls. First off, they're much smaller than here on the iPod, and that is because of the slightly larger screen. They had to, compromise and shrink down the size of this scroll wheel, or what looks like a scroll wheel anyways, because as you probably saw me earlier, these are buttons. You have to press up, down, and, left and right to navigate around this thing, even though that this would probably confuse a lot of people, and especially if they knew how the iPod worked, they might think like, oh, this is like I can scroll this around like this. No, they're just regular buttons. And they honestly feel like really cheap buttons too, which is just very disappointing because the rest of the Zune, this feels like a premium product. I mean, I would have been very happy with this had I picked it up back then. But then you go and try to navigate around the thing, and this just feels really out of place. The buttons are like so crammed together, whereas the click wheel on the iPod, I mean, this thing is in a league of its own. I mean, it's so easy and just feels so natural to pick up and use. And I mean, you can navigate around and, pick a song in a flash. Very, very easy to use compared to this thing. So while the Zune does have some, legs up in terms of hardware, I mean, I think the iPod overall gives you a much better usability experience. And I attribute that to, of course, the iPod was designed in-house by Apple, whereas the Zune, this is essentially a modified version of an existing media player that wasn't even made by Microsoft. This right here is the GIGABEAT S, an MP3 player made by Toshiba running Microsoft's portable media center software, which was actually their first attempt at taking on the iPod, just done in the way that Microsoft typically does things, by creating software meant to run on other people's hardware. And basically, the GIGABEAT S was used as a base for the Zune 30, which was also manufactured by Toshiba, just with a lot more input from Microsoft, which allowed them to get this thing to market much faster than if Microsoft had sat down and decided to build an entirely new MP3 player from scratch. So yeah, take with that what you will. Now, switching gears to the software, I honestly can say that I've been really impressed with this user interface. I think that it holds up pretty well even today. This UI is very modern feeling. It's a fast, fluid interface. Everything is laid out super nicely. The main screen here, you've got your different media types as well as the other functions that you can do on the Zune. You've got your settings down here. We go into music. You've got this nice bar across the top of all the different ways of sorting your music. You go into albums here, it gives you a nice album art preview. And yeah, we've got, apparently Rose is an anime fan because we've got some like OSTs on here for some shows that I've never heard of before. I've not actually plugged this into my XP system back here to sync, a couple songs with it, but we will do that in a moment because I definitely want to check out the desktop software. But just to be clear, this is not how this interface originally looked, because this is version 3.3 of the Zune software. If we go into settings here, I'll pull up the about info. This version came out in 2010, so 4 years after this device originally launched. And by this time, Microsoft had completely remodeled the interface and added some additional features. Probably the most notable of those are the networking related features, because originally the only thing you could do with the Zune's built-in network adapter is squirt media to other people, and that would be done through this social menu right here. You would see any nearby Zunes if you knew somebody who had one, and this is where you could also view like your Zune friends and your inbox and all that stuff. This kind of ties into the rest of the social features. But in version 2.0, they added the ability to sync your Zune with your PC over the network, and in version 3.0, they just put the entire Zune marketplace right here on the player itself. So you could go in, and if the Zune marketplace was still up, we could view the top songs, top albums, new releases. We could search for a song. You'd even buy stuff right from here, which, I mean, if these features had been in the Zune from the very beginning, that would have been a huge advantage over the iPod, which had to be tethered to iTunes every time you wanted to update your library. Another cool thing added in version 3.0 was in the radio here, you could go in and be listening to a station and it would show you what song was playing, and if that song was available in the marketplace, you could have the option to buy it right from there. Pretty freaking cool. It also can do video playback, you know, the iPod can as well, but we'll go in here and Rose also left a couple of, I think these are just full episodes of this anime, so we can just pick, I don't know, this one right here. It does play videos in landscape, so you have to rotate the screen. And this is where I think that the larger display really shines. Even though it's only half an inch larger than the iPod, it just feels much larger than that. I don't know. So yeah, you know, you can watch videos here. I maybe don't want to play too much of this because, you know, the copyright filter might pick up on that. But yeah, so it can do music, do videos, it can display pictures. I don't think there's anything on here though. Yeah, but you know, pictures would show up in here if there were. You got the social stuff, radio, you can listen to podcasts. You got some games on here as well. So we've got Texas Hold'em, Sudoku, Space Battle, Hexic, and Checkers. So yeah, I mean, the Zune got some pretty major updates. I mean, this marketplace thing, the fact that you could do that just right from here was very, very cool. And speaking of the marketplace, well, we're not going to be able to take a look at that since it's been down for years, but what I can show you is how you would copy all those songs you got from LimeWire over to this using the desktop software. Alright, so we're going to get started by popping in the startup CD to our XP system. And it pops up with an auto run and welcomes us to the social. Thanks for coming, we're glad you're here. I assume this is just going to be version 1.0 of the software, which I actually wonder if we're probably going to have to update this since the Zune here is running, you know, version 3.3 of the firmware. It might not be compatible with this older version. Yeah, Zune software 1.0. One thing I'm really curious about is how the Zune functions when it already has media installed on it and you try to plug it into another computer and oh look, there's an error in launching the Zune software. Oh no. Okay. Did it install? It did not install. I thought for sure this was going to work without any troubleshooting, but I might have to do some research here and see what we have to do. You know, it could be because it's trying to connect to a Microsoft server. That's probably exactly what it is. Let's just hit accept here and try to run through this again. There is a bit of a revival project that's been released. You can head on over to zuneupdate.com, and this is a way for you to do firmware updates on your Zune. You just edit your hosts file, and then it's able to download everything from a third-party server, which is fantastic. And I thought that just pertained to the firmware updates on here, but we may need to do that so that we can run through the Zune setup wizard. Oh my gosh, I got it to work, and I think that this was because I had some updates to install through Legacy Update, because I read online that the Zune application requires .NET Framework. I tried to install a few versions of those, and that didn't work. I tried to change the host file to point to that updated third-party Zune server. That didn't work. Then I went into Legacy Update and installed some stuff, and now it installed, and you see we're here at this Make a Connection screen. So, yeah, we got it working. Isn't that fantastic? Now, I think this has been a complete waste of time because I have a feeling that it's going to complain about the Zune firmware version on here being too new, and we're going to have to update this software anyways. And like I was saying earlier, I am curious to see if this is going to make us get rid of all the songs and videos and stuff already on the Zune for us to sync it with my own library that I'm going to create here. I'm hoping that we can back up this stuff because I just would like to do that anyways on the off chance that any of this stuff is like lost media. But I've plugged it in and we should, yeah, it says scanning for device still. I have a feeling this is probably because it doesn't recognize it since it's a newer firmware version. Can we go in here? I mean, I saw it said it installed like a driver, I think. Let me open up Device Manager and just see if it's got portable devices Zune. There it is. Okay, so it's got a driver installed for that. Let's maybe try to close out of the Zune software and go back into it. It's still scanning for device, so I think we're just going to have to click on skip for now. And library settings, choose your settings. You can always change them later. So Express, make Zune my default player. We are going to want to do that. Use the internet to get updates, album art, media info, and send data to the customer experience improvement program. We can change our privacy settings with custom, and we'll just uncheck the Zune customer experience program thing, even though this doesn't really matter because there's nowhere for it to send the data to. And then we've got file types. And you see, for whatever reason, WMA and WMV are not selected by default. I guess, you know, it would still be using Windows Media Player for that stuff, but we can add that to here to have it associated with the Zune software. One thing of note that you do not see in here are WAV files, because for whatever reason, the Zune could not play WAV files back, which I find incredibly strange, not only because this file format had been around for years by this point, but it was literally co-developed by Microsoft. And if you know anything about audio, WAV files allow you to save uncompressed audio that you can play back, and obviously the file size is going to be much larger, but if you really cared about audio quality, you probably are going to want to put uncompressed audio files on your player, which you can't do. Most people, I'm sure, don't really care about that kind of stuff. They just want to get as many songs as they can on their player, so MP3s provide a good compromise there. You can also stream to Xbox 360. We're not going to bother doing that, since I don't even have an Xbox 360, actually. But, yeah, you could stream music and video from... Now, this is not from the player. This is from the software itself. So that was a nice feature. We'll click on Next, and here we go. Of course, it cannot display the web page since Zune.net does not exist anymore. So we'll just, I guess, close out of this. Is the player still... Okay, that was the entire player. And it looks like it's already pulled all of my songs from my music folder on my computer, including the sample media that comes with Windows XP. So this is the Zune software, and if you're saying to yourself, gosh, this really looks like Windows Media Player just reskinned, that's because this is literally just Windows Media Player reskinned with the added functionality of being able to sync with the Zune players. So you will feel right at home here if you're familiar with how Windows Media Player works. We can go and let me play a piece of music that I can actually play on here. So we'll play Bet on It from Silent Partner. This is the song I use in my outro. And you've got playback controls down here. You can adjust the volume. We can go into full screen. And you got some visualizations going on, and then there is a little mini player mode as well. So yeah, very, very standard stuff. How do we get out of this? Do we just click this again? No. How do we get... Oh, hit this back button up here. You've got your library over here. You can sort by album, artist, song, genre, all that stuff. And then this is where you get access to the Zune Marketplace, which of course is not going to do anything, but it would show up in here and you would be able to, you know, buy a song. Let me try just to unplug the Zune player again, and we'll plug it back in, but I really think this is not going to work, and we're just going to have to go and get the most recent version of the Zune desktop software. So, yeah, I mean, we don't see... I'm assuming the Zune would show up over here, kind of like iTunes does, but you can see it's not doing that. And unfortunately, we don't get, like, just a drive that we can go into and copy all the existing stuff from the Zune over to my computer. So let's install the latest version of the Zune software after we manually uninstall the existing version. Sounds good. So I believe by this point, the Zune software was essentially rewritten, so this is not just like a reskinned version of Media Player. Apparently our video hardware is not fully compatible with the Zune software. It'll prevent us from enjoying video enhancement. That's fine. Now, from what I've read, apparently, when you launch the Zune software for the first time, if you have iTunes installed, it will import your iTunes library, except for, of course, the stuff that you've bought from the iTunes store. So that very well may have been what happened with version 1.0, but I think it was just pulling stuff from my music folder because the sample music was not in my iTunes library. And here's, I guess, the main interface, and you can see that, yeah, by this point they have definitely started implementing the Metro or Modern UI design language in here. We got some tiles going on. I'm also just moving the mouse cursor around, like I'm not clicking or anything. This is just what happens when you move around in here. Oh, look at that, we can get a 0-day free trial of Zune Pass. Isn't that awesome? And then here's all of our media that it's added for us. We got all our different ways of sorting it. We got the marketplace, which is permanently unavailable. And then the social stuff, which of course we have to sign in, which not going to be able to get any of that working either. So you can totally, once again, just use this as a media player if you want to. Let me see if I can plug in the Zune, and hopefully it will recognize it this time. So let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. There it is. Drag things in here to your device, and I can't show you because this cable is too short, but the Zune player is saying syncing right now. Okay, music. It looks like, yeah, this is all the stuff on here. We've got videos. So is there a way just to copy this? Like, okay, we can select stuff. And can we, like, right-click, copy to my collection? Okay, this right here gives the Zune a major leg up over the iPod, at least in my opinion, because you don't have to, like, you know, have it associate itself with a new library. If it already has stuff on it, you can just copy it over to your library and then write everything in your library back to the Zune. Now, is it going to actually, like, add these files to, like, if I go into my documents here and my music, is it going to, under Zune, it is adding those files right to my computer, so that's nice. And same with videos as well. So now we got all of that. I mean, it's still copying over, but it's almost done. If we go back to my collection, how do we... Oh, we can drag and drop things here to sync with your device. So let me just do a Control-A, drag items to sync, added 23 albums. And we've got all that copied over, so here's how the Zune looks when we have a lot of content on it. So I suppose we'll go ahead and just play something. It would feel kind of wrong to not try and, you know, hook up this pair of headphones and, you know, do kind of a dank pod style thing here where we just put the earbud up to the microphone. I'm definitely not going to try to blow this out, but yeah, we'll just play Rest by Otis McDonald, which is the music I use in time lapses. Did I mention that already? I think that I did. Anyway, so yeah, the Zune can play music. Who would have thought? Now, I am definitely no audiophile, just throwing that out there. I am not really an authority on, like, if it sounds good or not. To me, it sounds totally fine. I think the Zune is, you know, totally fine as an audio player from my usage of it off camera. And I just have to say that this interface, I know I already touched on it, just looks fantastic. I actually prefer it over the iPod user interface. I think that's primarily because it's like a dark mode and the iPod did not have that. And I mean, just like combining that with a better like navigational pad down here would have been fantastic, which is actually what Microsoft did with the second generation Zune that came out in late 2007. That introduced the Zune Pad, which was like a little touchpad that was down here instead of this awful D-pad. They also released a smaller model of that to take on the iPod Nano. And just like the Nano, it was flash-based storage rather than a traditional hard drive, meaning that it was a smaller device and it could be thinner, but the capacity was not as large. Then in 2009, they released the Zune HD, and that's where things really changed because this thing was an all touchscreen device and was essentially Microsoft's iPod Touch. So they gave it a web browser, a section in the Zune Marketplace where you could download games and some applications, but not even close to the amount that was available in Apple's App Store. And that, I think, really just sums up why the Zune had such a hard time gaining a significant market share. I hate to sum it up to it was because of Apple, but they did have a 5-year head start with the iPod. So by the time the Zune came out, they were far more established. There were more songs available in the iTunes store. Another minor thing worth mentioning was the Zune desktop software was Windows only. So if you had a Mac and maybe you were one of those rare people that, I don't know, didn't like the iPod or were thinking about actually buying a Zune, you were probably going to be pretty turned off as soon as you realized that you were going to have to install Windows on your Mac or just get another Windows computer. But let's be honest, that was probably a very small minority of people. A much larger problem was the fact that if you were already an iPod user and if you had bought a bunch of content from the iTunes store, that was not going to be able to be transferred over to the Zune. The Zune software was capable of bringing over the stuff in your iTunes library that you had added to it, like from CDs you had ripped or, songs you already had downloaded, from LimeWire or other places. But, if you had bought a bunch of stuff in the iTunes store, you would have to re-buy that again on the Zune Marketplace if all of it was available, which chances are you might have had a couple things that weren't because the Zune Marketplace was not as large of a, marketplace as the iTunes store was. But that, of course, is an issue whenever you change platforms, so it's why that, again, the fact that the iPod got a head start was really a major advantage for it. But then there was the fact that the features that really gave the Zune a leg up on the iPod, at least in my opinion, like the wireless library syncing and the ability to browse the marketplace right from here, those were not included with the Zune at launch. They were added later on in software updates. Now, sure, there was the song sharing feature and the whole social media aspect, but for those to actually mean anything, you would have to know people that also had a Zune, and chances are you probably didn't know very many people who did, with the iPod having such a huge market share even years after the Zune came out. So overall, here's what I'll say about the Zune. This is not a bad product at all. I honestly think this is a pretty solid piece of hardware, especially considering that this is first-gen hardware that is really just an updated, modified version of an existing media player. So even though the Zune died a very premature death and wasn't used by nearly as many people as Microsoft probably hoped, there were still a lot of people that loved this thing. I mean, the fact that there's still a community around today that is hosting that custom server so that you can update, your old Zune to the latest software version is pretty fantastic. I'm sure that it being featured in Guardians of the Galaxy also brought a lot of renewed attention to it, and I was surprised to find this out, but Microsoft has a video on their official YouTube channel showing you how to update a Zune and use it in the modern day, and they talk about this custom server and this community of people that are still keeping this thing alive today. And I didn't think I would ever see that, but that's pretty fantastic. So, yeah, that is the Microsoft Zune, at least the first generation Microsoft Zune, in all of its glory. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, get subscribed, maybe consider becoming a patron or a channel member to get early access to these videos before anybody else. But either way, I just want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.